Hi there, Paul here. I've been asked to do a video with audio this time, explaining how to use a gradient in Lightroom. So here's our sample picture. As you can see, it's very dark in the foreground. Overall underexposed, so we're going to try and put it right. Got a lovely wonky, horizon there, which we're going to address in Photoshop Elements 10. So the first thing to do is get the foreground balanced. So if we go to develop, we've got these controls here, which because it's a raw file, as you can see down there, we can alter obviously the exposure. Up here you can see the histogram all to the left, so obviously underexposed. So using this, we'll bring it up, bring it too much, you can see there, too bright. I'd say just for quickness, I think that'll probably do there. So a plus 2.99 exposure increase there. Now obviously the sky here is burnt out, because if we switch on the highlights blown warning, you can see the red areas. These are all areas that are obviously burnt out and overexposed. Now the gradient's going to affect this to a certain extent, so I'm not worried about that at the moment. If we go over to the right here, there's a graduated filter. So if we click on this, we can now apply a graduation filter, the same as would be applied if you put a graduated ND filter in front of your camera lens. So if we drag it down and place it pretty much in the correct place, we have a smooth graduated filter. So it takes all of that distance to graduate from its darkest to its lightest. Now I think for me that's going to be too much, so if we thin it down a bit, make it a little bit thinner to maybe about that, and put it back on the horizon like so, thereabouts, we can now apply an effect to this area. So the first thing we're going to do is decrease the exposure. Take it all the way down, the sky goes obviously very dark, but the foreground stays the same. So that's far too dark for me. So trying to balance the two up, I would say, as a guess, roughly about there, which is great. Now we can also add contrast to the sky by going to the contrast slider, still only affecting the area we've selected. That's a bit, perhaps the clarity, which will increase the contrast of the mid-tones to about there. We won't worry about sharpness or saturation because we'll treat it as a whole photograph later. So I think that's balanced in my opinion. Still a bit dark overall, so maybe if we put the exposure up a little bit more to there, just for the effect, I think that's nice. I do like the darkness in the corners, that's great. We have exposure here which is blown, so if we go to the recovery, which can help very much in this situation, and slide it along, and that's removed all of the overexposure in that particular shot. It's quite noisy, obviously, although it is ISO 100. When you do long exposures, you do tend to get noisy images, especially if you're adding and changing the exposure. This is a way to look into particular areas. So I usually pick a sort of a mid-tone area. You can see it's very speckled there, so we need to reduce the noise significantly there. Noise reduction, luminance, which is what causes most of the noise in photographs. If we slide it up, I think to about, I don't know, probably quite high, so probably up to 80 there. Although it hasn't refreshed on here, you can see that the detail is a lot smoother than it was. Okay, so now we're treating the overall image again. So the overall image, I think we can possibly increase the clarity a little bit. The vibrance, I usually put up to about 30, 35, that's 36 there, and the saturation just a touch, plus 3. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do in Lightroom. Now I'm going to export this over to Photoshop Elements 10. I use Ctrl E on the keyboard, which brings that up, and we'll go to the editing screen of Elements 10 when it opens. Okay, here's Elements 10, and as you can see, much smoother than it was in the previous image. A couple of things I'm going to do just very quickly is straighten the horizon. Using this straighten tool, we just draw a line on the horizon like so, and it straightens it out. We'll do a very quick crop. Again, I appreciate these videos can get a little bit tedious, so we'll do a very quick crop of this. You've got your rule of thirds now on elements 10, which is quite handy. So put the horizon on the third, which should be about there. Apply that, and there we have a nice framed shot. I'd like the yellows probably a little bit higher, a little bit more contrasty there. So we've got the background. We're going to apply an adjustment layer and look at the hue and saturation. But I only want to really look at the moment is these sort of yellowy looking things here in the sky. So if we select that specifically and then click the dropper, I can pick very specifically the area I want to increase the saturation of, which is there. So if I click that, well, there's interesting. Now you probably know I'm colorblind. I thought it was yellow, but if you look down here, it actually says red. It's in the red scale. That's fine. That's still the area I want to apply. So if I just bump that up a little bit, maybe to about 32, that should be fine. Now this area here I'd like to alter. So again, if I think that's more red. We select it and see what the program says. Yep, that's a normal red. So we put that a bit. You see, that's too much. So again, about 30 to maybe 35. That'll be fine. And look at this area here. I think that's probably going to be blue, perhaps. Dropper's still selected. Let's check. Yep, blue. So we're going to just put that up a small bit too. Okay. I then flatten that layer down. Now when I'm putting stuff up on Flickr and on the Photo Radar site, I always resize my stuff to resolution down to 72 and bring that down to 1000, and makes it easier to post in a smaller file. Now to get a sharpness here, because we've lost a bit of sharpness with the smoothing away the noise, I copy the background layer. I then enhance it by using adjust sharpness, and I always have it to 200 and 0.3 on the radius. Okay, and very finally luminosity blend between the two, and that's it, finished.